with training or service as an active duty Marine. These values forever guide Marines' decisions, their service, and in fact, their entire lives. Staff Sergeant Hoover lived these values throughout his entire life. You see, Staff Sergeant Hoover did always what he said he would do. He was honest, respectful, caring, and compassionate. He dedicated his life to the service of others in and out of uniform. He wanted to be the best and to provide the very best for others. And he was always willing to work hard to make that happen. His friends and his family knew him as a loving, thoughtful, hardworking man. He loved and was dedicated to serving those around him, his family, and his country. As a young man, he made a lasting impression on those who knew him. They described him as, and these are their words, not mine, the best friend, selfless, always level-headed, full of heart, hardworking, a teammate you could count on, a born leader, and as a good, kind person. By being the type of man that he was, he honored those who knew him. He honored the uniform he wore. And in his service and sacrifice, he honored the United States by representing and being the best of us. Staff Sergeant Hoover certainly knew the risks of his duty. He understood the risks of this deployment in particular. And in particular, he knew what was at stake and on the line on this particular day. American civilians had been warned not to travel to the airport due to specific credible threats of an attack. The Marines at the gate did not, of course, have the option of standing down or shirking their duty. They had a mission to complete. And despite knowing the very real threat to their lives that day, Staff Sergeant Hoover and his Marines followed orders and did their duty. They stood in close physical proximity with hundreds as they checked identification and shuffled people through the gate, one after the other. They didn't know if or ultimately when an attack might come. They just knew of the threat. Nonetheless, those Marines carried on, guiding countless innocent civilians to safety. His father, Dagen, put it best. He said, quote, "That's just the type of man he was, doing what he needed to do and getting the job done for those that couldn't do it for themselves. And he was standing out front leading his men," close quote. You see, Staff Sergeant Hoover demonstrated uncommon courage in fulfilling his duty that day, as with all other days in which he valiantly served. This was not Mr. Hoover's first deployment to Afghanistan. In fact, he served 3 tours of duty there in his 11 years in the Marine Corps. He knew what war in Afghanistan were like. He decided to carry on and continue serving because that's what he had committed to do. Since high school, he knew he wanted to be a Marine specifically. His father said he was dead set on it. When the news in Afghanistan developed, Staff Sergeant Hoover told his family that he wanted to be in the action to help with the evacuation mission. He died doing what he loved, serving his country and leading his men. Staff Sergeant Hoover was the oldest of the 13 service members killed in this attack. His life had been defined by his love of family and of country. He was committed to serving, and he lived and gave his life, showing the last full measure of devotion, demonstrating exactly what it means to be a United States Marine. Staff Sergeant Hoover leaves a legacy with his family, the state of Utah, and our nation. He represents the best among us, the commitment of a service member and a Marine, his dedication to the values of the Marine Corps, and full-fledged devotion to what is right will remain with us forever. he'll never be forgotten. And as the preparations are made to inter him along with other American heroes at Arlington National Cemetery, they can behold what the Marine Corps hymn promises, and millions of good Marines before him have seen. On heaven's scenes, you will find the streets are guarded by United States Marines. Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover joined the ranks of American heroes before him, always faithful. May God rest his soul. May God comfort his family. And may God bless us with the honor, courage, and commitment that Taylor Hoover truly lived. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Madam President. Last Friday, I joined Nebraskans to honor the dignified return of Corporal Dagen William Tyler Page of the United States Marine Corps, one of 13 service members killed in the terrorist attack at the Kabul airport. It was heartbreaking. But to see the thousands of people who lined the streets of Omaha between Epley Airfield and Bremen Mortuary was truly amazing. The outpouring of honor by the community during the procession was a solemn display of Nebraskans' love for one another and for this country. Nebraskans showed their gratitude for Corporal Page's service and offered support to his grieving family. Corporal Page was only 23 years old when his life was needlessly cut short in Kabul. He was born in Iowa, but his family moved to Nebraska when he was 5. He was a proud United States Marine. He enlisted shortly after graduating from Millard South High School in Omaha. He was stationed in Pendleton, California, but multiple deployments took him all around the world, to Japan, South Korea, Australia, Jordan, and Afghanistan. After he finished his service, he planned to attend trade school in Nebraska, hoping to eventually become a lineman. Corporal Page was also a beloved son, brother, grandson, and friend. He was especially adored by his younger siblings. To them, his family said, he was not just a hero in the Marines, he was their real-life hero too. And he had a soft spot in his heart for animals, most of all his 3 dogs. He loved hockey. He played on a state champion club team in high school, Omaha West Side, and he was a die-hard fan of the Chicago Blackhawks. He was a member of Boy Scout Troop 331, where he gained an appreciation for the outdoors, and of St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Millard. Hunting and being outside with his dad were among his favorite ways to spend his time. But he was also an avid skateboarder, amateur photographer, and an excellent sketch artist. His family has asked Americans to remember him for his, quote, fun-loving spirit, tough outer shell, and his giant heart, end quote. Corporal Page's dignified return to Omaha came just one day before the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, which brought us to Afghanistan in the first place. He was just 3 years old on September 11th, 2001, and his death came at the very end of a war that had lasted nearly his entire lifetime. We're also going to hear this afternoon about the other service members who lost their lives in Kabul on August 26. Like Corporal Page, most of these men and women had their whole lives ahead of them. Like Corporal Page, most of them were probably too young to have any memory of the event that took us to the country where they gave their lives. His sacrifice and that of these 12 other service members must not be in vain. It is now up to us, both here in Congress and in our daily lives across this country, to live up to the lofty example that is set by their selflessness. I ask that we remember him, his family, in our prayers, and that he rests in peace. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Utah.
this past weekend, we gathered to reflect on the anniversary of a national tragedy. The visible and invisible wounds incurred on that day continued to impact the lives of all of us. In the last 2 decades since 9/11, our nation has demonstrated enormous resilience, imponderable sacrifice, and pursued justice in dangerous lands, often under perilous conditions. We've asked our service members to do so very much to keep us safe, and they've responded with uncommon courage. Last month, 13 of our nation's finest upheld their sacred oath at the cost of their lives. They were struck down by the cowardice of terrorists, while at the same time they were helping innocent Afghan civilians reach a better life. Over 100 Afghan civilians were also killed on August 26th in that terrorist attack at the Kabul airport, and many more were grievously wounded. We also hold in our hearts the American service members who suffered those terrible injuries that day. On September 11th, 2001, Taylor Hoover from Sandy, Utah, was just 11 years old. 9 years later, he was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps. He would go on to serve 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan and earn both the respect of his fellow soldiers abroad and the admiration of those who knew him well and loved him here at home. As we recently gathered in Salt Lake City to mourn the life of Staff Sergeant Hoover, it was clear that this deep admiration was shared by thousands of the people of Utah. While our hearts were heavy with grief as his family shared their memories of Staff Sergeant Hoover, they were embraced by the crowd one by one as the ceremony concluded, and our communal bonds emerged ever stronger. Another brave Utahn also risked his life and sustained life-threatening injury while supporting the evacuation operations at the Kabul airport that day. Our nation thanks you, Corporal Wyatt Wilson, and we pray for your complete and speedy recovery. You and your brothers and sisters in arms have answered the call to serve with valor and devotion, and your service rendered continues to protect us to this day. Let us carry forward these shared values and reflections on sacrifice in our daily lives and endeavor to strengthen our national bonds of unity. May God bless our nation's fallen and our wounded, and may He bless also their families and all the service members who are today in harm's way. We're indebted to those known for their bravery, sacrifice, and heroism. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Ohio.
Madam President, I'm here today on the floor to remember the life of Navy Fleet Marine Force Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Maxton Soviak. Max was a 22-year-old native of Berlin Heights, Ohio, a young patriot who died far too soon in service to all of us. Max was one of 13 brave American servicemen and women who were tragically killed when an ISIS-K suicide bomber in Kabul on August 26th exploded a bomb